Paranormal Oddities, The Little Store with the Big Heart, Para-Niagara at the Western Block, one of the top-rated haunted destinations in Western New York, Dragonfly Art and Soul, Metaphysical Goods and Classes, Mystery Control, your go-to feed for science, magic, true crime, paranormal, and much, much more. Everybody, Tim Shaw here. So glad that you're coming by. I've got a great show for you tonight. I'm all excited because, a lot of people don't understand the basis of what? They don't know the basis of why paranormal investigating became so interesting, so widespread, and it's a homegrown thing. It occurred here in New York State. And it is an amazing, it's just an amazing story. I have probably one of the best, such a good friend of mine. I love her to death, like more than what you know. Our guest tonight. And I'm not, listen, I got too much to cover tonight. So I want to jump right in. Our guest tonight is the executive director of the fabulous Palmyra History Museum complex. And I say complex because there is several buildings. And if you guys get a chance to visit Palmyra, New York, this is a place that you have to go to. The history is amazing. It's great because you got canal history, you've got local history. Palmyra, you guys know, is the birthplace of what? The Latter-day Saints, right? It's got so much there, and they cover so much of it in the museum. But they have a coverlet museum, which is beautiful. But they have the Phelps General Store. And the Phelps General Store is mind-blowing. You walk in there, you go back in time, and the last occupants of Phelps was a spiritualist and a reader, and it's a lot to it. And it's haunted. The whole complex is haunted. Believe me, it's haunted. It's crazy. I love it. It's one of my favorite places to go. But I want to bring to you a good friend, and we're going to talk about the beginnings of spiritualism, a religion that swept the world at one time. It was one of the biggest growing religions in the world, and it still is huge. They take their spiritualism hardcore in Great Britain and especially in Australia. I was shocked, and we have so many friends in Australia now that they're like, my God, you live in Mecca. You live in Mecca. You can drive 2 hours and visit Hydesville. People don't realize how important this place is. So guys, please, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and puppies of all ages, please welcome to the Black Cat Lounge, a good friend of mine, Tracy Murphy. Tracy, how are you, my friend?
I am doing so much better now that I'm with you. How's that?
No, you're doing so much better since you put the puppy in another room.
I did put the puppy in another room. So forgive me, everyone, if you hear barking. It's
it's we had a puppy that was gnawing on poor Tracy's leg. So
yeah.
these are things that happen. That's what's so great about doing live, because of the
real
fact
life.
It's just fun. It's all real life.
Yep.
Tracy, first question, and it's me being me, and I love the history of my own home state, and I love the Victorian age and the Edwardian age, which is actually before it. Why do you think that? And I'm going to ask not just spiritualism, because there was all sorts of religions and traditions and philosophies that developed along the Erie Canal, which they called the burned over district. Why do you think that was just so ripe at the, I always talk about the right place at the right time. Why
Mhm.
do you think it was the right time for all of these spiritual awakenings to happen?
You know, it's very interesting because I just did a talk last Thursday about the burned over district, because a lot of people hear the phrase and they're not quite sure what it means. And honestly, I have heard the burned over district since I was a kid because that's part of Wayne County in Western New York. So I did a little diving, and of course, it's, going down the rabbit hole. It took me a very long time to actually wrap up my talk, uh, to the point where it wasn't going to be about a 6 hour sermon. There is just so much, and there was so much going on. And here in Wayne County and Western New York, we were basically known as the wild frontier. So, back in the early 1800s, we didn't have, churches set up. There were these ministers, they were called circuit riders, and they would go out and they would preach to these communities and just go from town to town and village to village. And after a while, these people in all of these close knit communities kind of got a little tired of it. And instead of being burned out, it should have, or burned over, it should have been burned out, because I think a lot of people were really kind of getting tired of the consistency of hell and damnation and sin, and we're going to go preach. And it wasn't just like, oh, we're going to show up on Sunday for an hour. It was basically like, we are here for, the next 2 days, and we're going to put up a big tent, and people are going to come from all over to hear this message. So I think, after a while it was kind of like, oh, okay, oh, another revival, another revival. um but it was just, it was these men, some of them were self-proclaimed ministers, and they would just go out and preach the good word. And after a while, I think people were just like, okay, here we go again. um
So
you
true.
know
So true. And you know what? Not to belittle the zealotness of the zealotness. I'm an author. Yeah, I make up words as I go along. The zeal, the zeal
the
of these
zeal
men.
and zest.
They go and they, I mean, we see it today, and I can understand how it can be it can be so infectious, especially you're going to farm communities, and
Yep.
it takes almost 2 weeks sometimes for the news to
Yes.
come from one end of, the what they basically from New York City inland. So I can understand how this stuff is, and people how and those of you in New York State, the Chautauqua movement, Chautauqua Institute, was
Mhm.
actually based on these talks, and that's something that I love. Little known facts, Tracy. Little known
Oh,
facts. We're full of them. We're
yeah,
full of them.
I had no idea that Alfred University is one of the oldest universities still today that was admitting women and African
Yes,
Americans. And that
yes,
was a big thing.
huge.
It wasn't, I mean, I think like the whole spiritualist movement and the whole burned over district just kind of like, it was so right at the right time. There,
I believe so too.
yeah.
And the spiritualists, and before we get off on a tangent, because that's what Tracy and I are known to
Gonna happen.
do. Uh, what I think is fascinating about it is the fact that spiritualism was one of the first movements that allowed women free access to speak and to
Yes.
preach and to talk. And, it's something that
And to
was
think.
it was way ahead of its time,
Yes.
way ahead of its time.
Hmm.
Now,
Absolutely.
now, Tracy, let's talk about why the Fox family ended up in Hydesville. Now, Hydesville, if correct me if I'm wrong, Hydesville at the
Hmm.
time was a backwater
Yep.
little town. Uh, not that it wasn't that far off the Canal District,
Right.
but why did they end up there? Because uh, there's so many other places to go, and we do know that there's grown children involved,
Yep.
and we do know that their parents, and you can go into the story.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
of why they went there. And to me, I remember for years as a kid knowing about the Hydesville house and knowing where it was when it was moved into Lilydale
Yeah,
and burned subsequently, or before I was born. But it was the fact that uh, I never understood why they ended up in such a remote area. So
exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of it too, when people hear the story about the Fox sisters, they just kind of get the whole, they were in Hydesville and then they moved and then they did this and they went from A to B. But really it does start back with, the parents were from Canisius. And then for a while, Mr. and Mrs. Fox were together, and they essentially had 4 children um, in this first season of their life. And then for about 14 years, they separated. And while they were separated, Mrs. Fox goes back to her parents and raises her children. And then Mr. Fox comes back into their lives, sober and newly reformed Methodist. And he has decided, this is my family and we're going to make it work. And for a while they were in the Catskills, but the older children actually were up here, and a lot of them had settled in Wayne County. And it was David Fox, their only son, who kind of suggested, hey, you might want to come to Hydesville. It's a booming little community here. It was considered a hamlet. It was right outside of Arcadia, or Newark as we know it today. And there was opportunity. David Fox was offering land to his father to build a home, and they weren't getting any younger. And now they've got 2 young children after they've gotten back together. And so for the parents, I think it was a great opportunity to be closer to their family, be closer to David. And that way, if anything ever happened to them, the girls had a place to go. And literally, David's house is 2.5 miles up the road from where the Fox cottage stood. So it was just a great opportunity. They tried living in Rochester with their older daughter, Leah, and it just wasn't what John wanted. He wanted the tranquility of the country. He wanted farming. And it just kind of all set itself up for them to be in Hydesville at that particular time.
it what really amazed me was the fact that they settled in a house. They settled in this little cottage that previous renters,
The reputation.
yeah, it had a reputation of being haunted.
Yeah. Yep.
Could just vaguely, just quickly, just kind of gloss over that, because that's so
Oh,
important, because a lot of people don't realize that stigmatized land often goes and has repeated haunted
yeah.
reputation and manifestations that go on.
Yes. So the house did have a reputation. Mrs. Fox was very well known for walking into the house and looking around and saying, "This house is haunted," and she was right. Previous renters of the home, because it was a rental home, previous renters had a visitor, and this was when the Bell family was staying in the home. And they had a visitor of a peddler who came with his tin pack and all of the wares that he would have had in there, like his linens and thimbles and needles. And gosh, your heart's desire would be carried in this tin and or in this pack. And he stopped at the house, and when Mrs. Bell, the tenant at the time, when she answered the door, some say it was a little friendly, as if her and the peddler may have been old friends. We don't really know, but we do know that he was invited in, and she and the girl that was staying with them, Lucretia Pulver, enjoyed a whole afternoon of in-home shopping. And Mr. Bell comes home and sees the peddler, and for whatever reason, they've decided that Mrs. Bell is going to take Lucretia home. And Lucretia lived with the Bells during the week, but she would go home on the weekends. And so it was decided that Mrs. Bell would take her home, and she did. And they left the peddler at the house with Mr. Bell. Now, the stipulation of Lucretia going home was that the peddler would visit her within the next few days to secure funds for a dress that she wanted. And the peddler told her, yeah, I'll be at your father's house in a few days, and I'll just drop by and he can pay me and you'll get the dress that you want. And so off they go. But within a few days time, Mrs. Bell shows back up and kind of apologizes and says, geez, Lucretia, we really do need you back at the house, and I'm so sorry we were so abrupt in taking you home. And they're riding back to the cottage, and Lucretia doesn't really have much to say. And Mrs. Bell is kind of like, what's the problem? Why are you so quiet? And she says, well, I'm really upset because this guy, the peddler, never stopped at my father's house like he said he would. And it was kind of interesting because Mrs. Bell just had all of these wonderful little tokens that she had purchased from the peddler. And it was really, that's when the manifestation started. Lucretia came back into the home, and that night she was in the cellar and she fell in a large hole that had been semi filled in. And she yelled out, and the Bells were kind of like, oh, stop your screaming, it's probably rats digging in the basement, which would have been a deal breaker for me. I would have been like, okay, you know what, you take me back home. Yeah, I'm not falling in rat holes.
Listen, you know what? That would be something I would tell my wife.
Right. Deal breaker.
Oh, don't worry about it, honey. No, it's just a rat hole. Don't worry
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
It just it just happens. It just happens. That's
oh yeah. Yeah.
You're talking
big deal.
You're talking to the guy that this kid downplays all sorts of paranormal stuff in the house.
Yeah.
So it's like, no, don't worry about it. But what I thought was interesting about that is the fact that it already had a reputation. The house had a reputation.
Yes.
And I don't know how many people I know that a location may be, may have that stigmatized legend to it, but yet they still go in. And we're talking about Amityville. We're talking about various places. We're talking about modern times. We're talking about the Fox Hollow Farm,
right?
Where the murder of over 35 young men occurred. And people don't really, you don't think about it. You just move in and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when the Fox family came in, and we were talked about it briefly, it was amazing to know that being religious, nothing was going to bother them. Nothing really bothered them, and I understand that. I understand, working with different people. But what was that divine spark that created the movement of spiritualism? I mean, I know we celebrate it in March, but is it something that really was how I'm going to phrase it is, was it true communication? And I'd love for you to just kind of tell the story of what actually happened and afterwards. And I do have one question. My friend Amy has written, how did the father as a Methodist feel about spiritualism?
Well, poor Mr. Fox, he is a very looked over character in the whole story of, as the family progresses and, the wrappings occur and the girls go on to have these, this life. His job was to provide the spiritual education to his family as the father and the head of the household. That's what it was. And so for him, once these manifestations were kind of like, they figured out like, oh, this is what's going on, this is what we have to do, he pretty much kept to himself. And in a lot of the literature, you'll find that he's not around. He doesn't travel to Rochester. He doesn't travel to New York City,
Hmm.
only when things are tough. And then he makes an appearance. But for him, he was back home. He was back home. He was building his house. He was trying to figure out, what was going on in their rental home. But for the most part, he stayed true to his religion, and he didn't poo-poo it. He was supportive of his family, but he really didn't have much to say as far as, you never heard him say, I am a supporter of spiritualism.
Now we have another question, and I know you're going to get to it. What happened to the peddler? So
Yeah.
what we're going to do is I'm going to allow you to tell the story of how they came about finding out what happened to the actual peddler itself. So
Okay.
to me, this is the meat and potatoes of the whole story.
Yeah. And it's, I'm going to do my best to just kind of sum it up. So, if anybody ever really wants to hear me give the 2 hour spiel, I invite everybody. Yeah. Right. Just get a hold of me and I make appearances or show up at the property. I'll make another appearance. But the whole, I think, like you said, the whole meat and potatoes of the story is basically that they were noticing things right off the bat when they first moved into the house. So some of the things that they would notice were slight tapping noises. And every once in a while they would hear it on the door or the window or maybe on the floor. They would feel cold breezes. And it didn't really make any sense. It wasn't adding up, but it was occurring every single night. And on that night of March 31st, 1848, their mother basically said to them, listen, I've had enough. And you girls, they were 9 and 12, you girls are going to go to bed, and I don't want to hear any noise about the noise. And so the girls are going to bed. They're getting ready. They are, getting into their nightgowns and they're getting ready to go to bed, and they hear it again. And it's just an ever so slight knocking. And then they hear it again. And it gets louder and louder. And they say that it was so loud that it shook the house. It was almost like, if you didn't hear me the first time and if you didn't make notice of me the second time, I'm sure going to make sure that you notice me now. And so it was Kate Fox, the youngest sister, who yelled out, Spirit, do as I do, because they didn't know what it was. And there's a little controversy. Sometimes people will say, oh, she said Mr. Splitfoot. And to them, Mr. Splitfoot was actually like the sign of a devil. They believed the devil had the body of a goat and the torso and the head of a human. And because goats have split hooves, they would call the devil Mr. Splitfoot. But whatever they said, we know that, Katie yelled out, do as I do. And she clapped her hands 3 times, and they heard an immediate 3 raps, just like somebody knocking on the door. And then her older sister, Maggie, because she's not going to be outdone by her little sister, she yells out, Spirit, do as I do. And she claps her hands 4 times, but she doesn't make any noise. So it was basically like this 4 times. And they heard an immediate response of 4 raps. And that is when Maggie yells out, oh, look, mother, they can see as well as hear. And now Mrs. Fox is like, no way, we're not doing this. This is crazy. And she yells out to Mr. Fox and says, oh, John, this noise is answering the children. And he is just flabbergasted. He's just like, I don't understand. What do you mean it's answering the children? It can't. And the girls say, oh, yes, it can. And they go on to demonstrate, and they're clapping their hands and they're hearing the immediate responses. And it's actually Mrs. Fox who says, is this a human being who makes these noises? Give one clap. And they hear nothing. And so she says, is this a spirit that makes these noises? Give two claps. And they hear two. And it just goes on and on. And she is just like, oh my gosh, you just blew my mind. Now I got to get the neighbors in here, because surely the neighbors will put an end to this. And and it's Katie Fox says, I know what this is. Tomorrow's April Fool's, and someone's trying to trick us. And Mr. Fox is running around with the Bible, and he's opening the door and there's nobody there, and he opens the window and there's nobody there, but the noises are happening and they're everywhere in the house. And so Mrs. Fox says, John, go get the neighbors, the sound-minded neighbors, and bring them back. And he goes out and he brings them back, and they're asking questions and their questions are answered. And then finally David comes down, and it is David that says, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're going to write the letters of the alphabet out on cards, and we're going to start pointing to these letters, and you tell us, what is your name? And here we go. And he would go to A and B and C, and they would write it down. They kept doing this until they got the whole story. And this took quite a bit of time, as I'm sure you can imagine. But they found out that it was the peddler. He was murdered. His name was Charles. He had 5 children. He was recently widowed. He named his assailant and why he did it. And there you go.
What always amazes me is the fact that it became such a sensation. Again, we're talking a small hamlet. We're talking
absolutely.
We are talking miles away from other
Yep.
homes and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But within just an unbelievable amount of time.
Yeah. 500 people.
500 people
day
came.
After day after day after day.
Now, what was important to me, and this is something that because I love New York State religions and I love all the different things that happened and all the traditions. Talk a little bit about the Shakers, and they, when they declared it real.
Well, I don't know about that.
Oh, well, the Mother Ann Lee.
You'll have to tell me.
Well, Mother Ann Lee.
Well, Mother Ann, yes.
Yeah.
Mother Ann Lee.
She went
we just talked about her, but we didn't tie her into spiritualism. What
she did is she had a prophecy, and her prophecy was that the United States would go and have a revival of spiritual renewal, but also a time of economic renewal. And the same year that spiritualism became widespread, and the first knockings came, we have the discovery of precious minerals at Sutter's Mill.
Oh.
So it's the exact same year. So the prophecy came true. And when the Shakers went back and told Mother Ann Lee, that's when it really started to spread, because now it gave legitimacy to it. Just right. And also, let's talk about what happened. Now, Paranormal 101. You have something, you buy something at the estate sale, you bring it home, and next thing you know, there's all sorts of stuff going on in your house. What do? You remove it and take it outside. Talk a little bit about what happened with the girls.
Oh, these poor girls. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So here we are, there's all these people in their homes. These knockings are manifesting. And one of the neighbors does notice that the girls do seem a little bit frightened, whether it was all of a sudden this rush of, oh my gosh, here we go, like this is happening. They also notice that when the girls are together, the noises are more pronounced. And so the neighbor says, geez, Mrs. Fox, you might want to take the girls up to your son's house and hope, maybe this will all die down in a little bit. with the peddler, one of the things that he had said was that he had been murdered and buried in the cellar. And now the men have decided, well, we're going to dig in the cellar. We're going to see if we can find him. If he says he's down there, we're going to find him. So the girls do go up to David's house, but it doesn't stay quiet at David's house, because now the manifestations are happening up there. Now back at the house, still happening down there. So I think it's kind of around that moment that Mrs. Fox kind of has one of those aha moments. And I think for the girls, I think they knew that something big was about to happen, like, even though something
Mhm.
big really did happen. But I think they kind of knew, like, there's no turning back. Like, whatever is happening, we're in it for the long haul. So, digging is down at the Fox cottage. And of course, water is filling up the basement, so they're not getting anywhere and they kind of give up. But, when David gets back up to his house, his wife is like, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what's happening up here, because now we're hearing knocking noises up here. And then eventually, Mrs. Fox says, geez, maybe we should send one of the girls to go stay with Leah. And Leah was the problem solver. She was very much a very stern, no nonsense kind of woman. It's interesting to me because she really kind of fell into the role of manager right away. She really didn't know what was going on in Hydesville until someone read it in a newspaper in Rochester and basically said, aren't you related to the Fox family in Hydesville? And yeah, I am. And he was like, oh gosh, do you have any idea what's going on down there? So she basically, jumps on a packet boat, comes down the canal to Newark to come out to Hydesville. And once she gets out here and she's talking, to her mother, and she's talking to David, and she's kind of getting the gist of what's going on. I think that's when, things start to click in her mind. For Maggie in particular, just the fact that Leah showed up was a relief to her, because like I said, Leah was the problem solver. And if Leah showed up, you knew that a solution was going to be had. And her solution was to take Kate back to Rochester with her
Mhm.
and kind of put an end to this trickery, whatever these girls were doing. It kind of backfired.
Oh, it did. Well, I always found it fascinating because in so many of the works that I've read, when they went down the basement and they started digging around, they found human bone, or what a physician said were human bone,
Yep.
a
Some hair.
cranium,
Yeah.
and hair, and some
Lime and
quick lime
yeah.
and stuff.
Yep.
So that kind of always like stuck with me, because it's like, okay, how
Might be
many
some
times
truth to it.
exactly,
Right.
but later on, I'm just going to jump the story a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, what I found was interesting is the cottage actually was moved, and we'll talk
Mm-hmm.
about that later. But what was interesting was that kids were in the basement, in the cellar,
Yep.
and part of the wall fell in,
Yep.
and it was a double wall. And this is the
That's
location
it.
of the double wall today,
Yep.
and they found bones.
Yep.
And it was a
And the
headless.
back.
Wasn't it a headless corpse or something that was in there? So
Mm-hmm.
I think they were in the.
Yeah.
I think the Bell family may have been
Yeah.
part of this dismembering,
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
get rid of the evidence. But I thought it was very, very interesting, the fact that they actually did find it. And
Mm-hmm.
let's talk about Leah for a couple minutes. Leah was an older sister, right? And now
Yes.
she had been abandoned. Didn't she had a daughter, and then she was abandoned, and then she ended
Yes.
up in Rochester?
Yep. So she was married when she was 14, and
Wow.
she had
Wow. Wow.
can you imagine?
I can't
Yeah.
imagine.
No, me either. She had her daughter when she was 15. and her husband, they say that he abandoned her and he moved out west and remarried or whatever. We don't really know too much about him. And honestly, I've never been interested enough in him to kind of look him up, but
Hmm.
I probably will at some point. But I think for her, I never really had a high opinion of Leah. She just seemed very bossy, very pushy. It was all about, making a dollar, work, work, work,
Yes.
work, work. And I, I don't know, like the more I read and the more I research, and then I always learn something different every time I go back. I just started thinking like, I can't even imagine being 14 and getting married and then being 15 and having a baby, and how traumatic that probably was for
Right.
her,
Yeah.
and then to have this man who, you know, is supposed to be taking care of you for the rest of your life and your child just up and leave. I mean, she really pulled herself up by her bootstraps.
Yes.
She started giving music lessons. She had a beautiful voice. They say that she was very well trained with her voice and singing. She could play the piano like it was nobody's business. And that's how she made her living. And she was doing pretty good because she was living in the big city of Rochester and making ends meet.
Right. That's
So,
amazing. That Leah sometimes gets a bad rap because of the fact that uh eventually the younger sisters grow to hate her because of
yeah,
the fact that she put them on the circuit.
yep,
She put them out there.
yes,
And I understand, and you got to understand that. And that,
yep,
but the reason I brought her up was, and because she becomes a sympathetic character in the story because of the fact that she did what she had to do to survive
yeah,
and
yep,
make a living for the girls too, and for the
yes,
parents. I'm sure there was money that was
yep,
sent back to the parents.
always.
So people don't get people always like really when I've all these books I've read, they really kind of come down on Leah.
They do.
And
Yeah,
I give her I have sympathy for her,
yeah.
even though she was caught with phosphorus on her hands later on doing a seance. But that was another story. We'll talk
Right.
about that.
That's how
Well,
she met her last husband, her
yeah,
third and last husband.
yeah.
Yeah. He came to her defense.
So, but now we'll digress.
I
We'll go
know,
back.
right?
Girls are in Rochester now. According to Leah's book, they talk about they wake up one day and there's coffins drawn on the ceiling, and they were doing what they considered at the time a seance, and it was get to Corinthian Hall.
Yes. That was the message. Get to Corinthian Hall and spread the word.
Right,
Spread the
right.
word.
Now,
Yes.
what people don't realize is it was a hall, and now it's a parking garage. By the way, just
Mm,
if you go down there in Corinthian Street, it's a parking garage. But it was a law library, and it was a place of where you would have shows and you would have dramas and that there. And we have to remember the time period,
yep.
and we have to always remember that it was, like you said, Rochester was the Wild West too.
Yes, it
So
was. Yep.
it was tough. Tell everybody about just how I mean they
Yep.
about how they had to check the girls, and
Yep.
and they searched them, and
Oh, it
and
was
what
horrible.
happened. Yeah,
Yeah.
it had to be so embarrassing for two country girls to have to put up with this.
Right. Yes. When you're talked to from, the time you are born, how important modesty is. And then all of a sudden you're thrown on a stage in front of all of these mostly men who want to see you perform. And for them, that message came to them was rent Corinthian Hall. And I don't think they were prepared for what was about to happen to them. But they were put on stage. Basically, there were like physicians and scientists and, educated men. And they were basically like, okay, go ahead, call your spirits. Let's see this. And so they would, call in the spirits as they were learning to do. And these men would sit there and hold on to their feet and their ankles or their knees, and because they were so sure that these girls were making it by cracking a joint or a bone or something. And when that wasn't enough, then they said, all right, strip them down, because they got to be doing it somewhere, somehow. And so these girls were stripped in front of these men, and they were standing on chairs, and the men were, do it again, call your spirits. And, I just, when you look back and, you're looking at these times, and we're talking like 18, this is probably like 1849, 1850s, this would never happen today. Never. But back then it was just like, this is what we're going to do. And, if they're lying, we're going to figure it out. And at the end of all of it, these men, these educated scientist, physician, men could not find one single explanation to say, yeah, I felt their joints, I felt their toes wiggle, or whatever they were thinking. So I think after that, it was a little bit of a turning point for Leah, and I think a turning point for their mother. But they really did have some very influential community members who kind of came to their protection, and kind of took them under their wings and said, no, listen,
Right.
enough is enough, and I'll let them be, and they're going to go do what they're supposed to be doing.
They also, what I found interesting was the fact that all these wealthy men, they didn't vie for their attention. They wanted individual attention, like Horace Greeley.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
Horace Greeley, which one? I can't remember. I think it was Maggie became his, like, or was it Kate? Became his personal medium. That she became like almost a
Yes.
ward. She actually lived with him for a while,
Yeah.
because they had lost a child, and they wanted that communication. That to me is amazing. But what is, and we're going to go over time, because this is like, this story is the story of the Fox sisters, is something that is just, it transcends logic, but it also, I mean, you can believe it or not, but
right,
it's the facts that just kind of blow your mind.
yeah.
Later on, I mean, they were on a barnstorming circuit, is basically what they were.
Yep.
And they were displayed, and even in Corinthian Hall, they said that they found a vat of tar where they were going to tar and feather, everybody involved. And they were, these roughhousers were out there, and they were drinking, and they were screaming, and heckling them as they,
they were constantly being threatened, and not just like, we're gonna spit on your shoes, but we're gonna kill you. We don't believe in what you're doing, it's blasphemy, and we're gonna kill you. And these are little kids, they're little girls.
That's what's so sad about it, because of the fact that you start seeing this over and over and over again, and you see it in so many different of the different sects and the different religions that evolved during that time period. Now I'm going to shoot up. I'm going to shoot up till they're women, and
their lives are not so happy.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem. I think that's the biggest problem with the modern spiritualism. When they teach about the Fox sisters, they only go so far. And then it goes into the religion, it goes into all these other seers and all these other prophets and all that. But the problem is we have to look at what happened to these little girls, and how tragic their lives became. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that is a huge point, that, when people talk about the Fox sisters, they always refer to them as Maggie and Katie. And to me, that those are their childhood names. And so people see them as these sweet little girls who, were able to speak to spirits, but they forget that these little girls grew up, and not always under the best circumstances. They had the world at their feet, so to speak, but they were very much trapped in this situation where all they really, the only choice they ever had was to sit and do seances or give readings for very wealthy people who wanted nothing more than to just sit before them to speak to their loved ones that had passed. And, you know, especially for Maggie, Maggie never really, I don't think Maggie ever was able to fully blossom. Um, you know, she was very much on her way as an 11, 12-year old to that early marriage and family. And, you know, this is whatever my husband says is I'm going to do. Where Kate was a little bit younger and still a more carefree. So they hadn't reined her in yet. And I know that sounds terrible, um but for Maggie, you know, she did fall in love, and she had someone that she cared about deeply, and he cared about her. But again, you've got religions clashing. She's a spiritualist, he was Catholic. Her family, you know, didn't really care for him because he was like 25 years older than her. His family could not stand her because she was a spiritualist and she had no money and she was uneducated. So he, you know, he would come and visit her every single day and basically say, okay, so I would marry you if you were a Catholic. I would marry you if you were educated. And I would marry you if you just stopped doing all this reading nonsense. Even though he came to her to talk to his deceased brother. So, you know, and she does everything he asks her to do. Um, some people will say, no, they were never married. I firmly believe they were married. Back then, it was as simple as holding someone's hand and having a witness and saying, I marry you, you marry me, we are married. That
Exactly. And the gentleman's name was Elijah Kane, and
Elijah Kane.
he was actually an Arctic explorer,
Laura.
and the two of them were basically like the rock stars of
They
that
were.
era. I mean,
Yes.
it's an amazing,
Yes.
amazing story, but it's so tragic because of the fact that they just the
They
families
couldn't
didn't
get it
like
together.
no, and
Yeah.
then he eventually
Yep.
he ended up sick and he
Oh, yeah.
passed away,
And he died.
and
Yeah.
that to me is so tragic. And if you guys
Yeah.
ever get a chance to read the letters
Yep.
left behind, because his family wanted the letters, right?
Yes,
They
they
were
did.
like they wanted to wipe this thing clean, and so they
Yep.
tried to get the letters, and she wouldn't
Yep.
do it, and she ended up
Maggie wanted
publishing
the
it.
money.
Yeah,
That's, you know, he left her money.
yeah,
And if that didn't say something, it's not like you just leave a random person your money. He left her a stipend, and
yeah,
you know, and she was like, it's mine. I'm entitled to it as his wife. And they were like, no way. And she's like, okay, fine. Well, I've got hundreds of letters and I'm gonna publish them. And you know, they called her bluff and she did it. Um, it just, you know, it just really, she never ever recovered from it.
exactly.
Never recovered.
And you know, I think that another thing that people, again, spiritualism, I can understand that being brought up a Roman Catholic and being brought up spiritualist.
Yeah.
They the powers that be gloss over all the darkness. And
Yes.
as humans, and I know myself especially, I like to see all the little nicks and crags and everything,
Yep.
because that to me is what brings the
Makes us human.
humanity. Yes.
Yeah.
You know, because it's like nobody's perfect.
Right.
And coming up through Lyceum,
Yeah.
Which is spiritualist Sunday school, coming up through Lyceum, coming up through the Morris Pratt Institute of Continuing Spiritualist Education, coming up through the
Yep.
ranks of the national. I really, I always felt that we did a disservice to these ladies
Yep.
because of the fact that we took the humanity away from them.
Yep.
And that to me has always been so sad,
Yeah.
because it just gets, you know, when we start looking at what they went through at that time and
Mhm.
how the movement became such a
Right.
positive,
Yep.
thing, especially for women, and the suffragette movements and everything,
Yep.
all blossomed from there. Now, towards the end of their life. Let's just talk about just kind of how sad and
Yeah.
what kind of happened to them. And we'll talk about what I found was also interesting was the burial plots. And we'll just talk about that because that is something that is just, to me, is heart-rending. It just broke my heart when I first discovered what happened to them.
Yep. So, they basically are older women now. And older, I mean like in their 50s. Kate did go on and she got married. She had 2 children. Maggie never had any children. And, towards the end of their lives, Kate makes the decision to come back to the United States. She was living in England with her husband and he passes away. And so she decides, I'm just going to come home and be with Maggie. And I think that Maggie was very grateful. They just could not cope with their coping skills were almost zero. And Maggie was drinking heavily. Kate was right behind her. So here they are living in New York City again. Actually, Leah, I think, she starts the fire and tries to take away Kate's children. And she goes to the police. She issues a complaint. The police have to follow up on it. The complaint basically is that the children are being neglected and that both of her sisters are drunks. And the police they go to the house, they find, the boys are fine, they're educated, they're, taken care of, they have a roof over their house, there's food in the cupboards, but Maggie and Kate are quite intoxicated most of the time. And, I think it's at that moment where they both decide enough is enough. She's done enough damage to us. We are done with her. Unfortunately for these women, they end up getting sick, and Kate is actually the first one to pass away. She passes in 1892 from kidney disease, and there's no place for her to go. They have no family plot. And thankfully it is their sister Leah who says, listen, my husband has a burial plot. We can put her there until you raise the money, to move her to her own space. Everything sounds great. She's, has her funeral. And then, interesting enough, next year, 93, Maggie passes away. And Maggie had heart disease. Honestly, I think she probably had broken heart syndrome. I don't know, but that's my opinion. And once again, there is no money and nowhere for her to go. And so the Underhills reopen the grave, and Maggie is actually buried with her sister, Kate. And this used to make me so sad because these women deserved so much more. However, the way I look at it is that the 2 of them always had a pact. No matter what, no matter where they would always spend Sundays together. Now, when Kate was over in England, that was a little difficult, and I'm sure they corresponded, on those Sundays or however they did it. But they always spent Sundays together. So for me, I look at it as, yeah, that it's tragic. They're buried together because they didn't have any money. However, isn't it nice that they were always together in life and now they're together in death?
Exactly. And just as a side note, later on, money was raised. They were moved.
Yes.
And they're buried together under a single grave in Brooklyn.
Yep.
This is the grave. The National Spiritual Association of Churches raised money, and they re-etched this. This is an older photograph, and they're both buried under this grave that you can go and you can visit today and venerate, which is amazing. Now, what I found was interesting is that at this time, before they passed away, people don't realize that they had. It's almost like the celebrity story, where they were like they were like just like shooting stars.
Yep.
And then
They dropped.
they crashed.
Yep.
People put pressure. I think it was on Maggie. People put pressure on Maggie, and she she recanted.
Yes,
And
she did.
as she was recanting, actually Kate was in the audience too.
Yes.
But just talk a little bit about that, and then what happened. To me, it was interesting because of the fact it was like you have to do what you have to do to survive,
Yep.
and then try to be true to yourself too.
Absolutely. And I think Maggie never fully, there were no jobs for her. It wasn't like she was going to go to the factory and work or do some
Mm-hmm.
sewing or take
Mm-hmm.
in some laundry. She was a medium, and that was her career. Same with Kate. Kate was lucky because she married a man who was a spiritualist, and he was like, you know what, you have at it, you keep doing what you're doing, that's great. But Maggie was always told, no, 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 you're no, that's terrible. And I think, at the end, there were enough people that knew her, that she was vulnerable. She had just come back from a trip to England, and I'm sure she was very tired and probably just wanted to go home and go to bed. And a reporter approached her and said, listen, we know you have problems. We know you have issues. We'll give you $1,500 if you tell everybody that you and your sister faked this whole thing.
And that's a huge amount back then.
It's a
Huge,
huge, it was
huge.
like $65,000 in
Yeah.
funds. And, I'm sure she probably thought about it for a minute and said, okay, I need money. I got to survive. I have a place that, I have to pay rent and I have to eat. And so she did. And she went to the music hall in New York City. There was like I guess there was more than 500 people.
Yeah.
I think there was like 2,000 people. But they all it was kind of like watching a train wreck. And her sister was there, and she just said that, yeah, my sister and I, we, cracked our toes and we dropped apples because we wanted to scare our mom, and it worked. And then my sister Leah got involved, and she got greedy, and here we are today.
What people don't realize, and even like my spiritualist teachers did talk about the alcoholism at the end of at the end of their lives. Yep. They always said, well, it's because of the fact that the little girls were given wine to drink and all. First of all, back at that time, alcohol was probably a lot safer to drink than the water, because that's where everybody got sick drinking the water.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
People don't realize that Joseph, the father, he was an alcoholic. He was a reformed alcoholic. So they were biological predisposition to it.
Yep.
So, and at that time, nobody knew anything about that. So it was just, it's such a tragic tale. It's so tragic.
Yep.
But out of all of that came, and of course, I mean, at this time, we had what they called the gold. We do know the golden age of spiritualism in 1849. But at this time I always call it the golden age of fraud, where people were out there and they were faking it, and everything. There were fraudulent mediums out there, and people were out there forced to do this in order to make money, because women had no real chance in life. They couldn't, outside of being domestic, or working in factories. Exactly. And people don't get that. People automatically, they get, you get your skeptics and your detractors jumping on that single thing. Excuse me. And that to me has always been heart-wrenching, because of the fact that they're not they're not looking at the humanity of these poor women and what they went through. Now,
that's always been my end goal, doing this and trying to educate people and spreading their story and doing all the research that I've done, is that at the end of the day, they're no different than anybody else.
Yes.
They were just these two young girls that were put into a situation that honestly, I don't know if anybody else could have handled, because they handled it the best way they could.
Exactly. And the only way that they could at the time.
Yep. And if you don't know any different, you're not going to do any different.
Exactly. Now I always like to tell this story. We had permission.
Uh-oh.
We had permission from Miss Tracy. We actually went to the foundation, to the Fox family. I do have just a real quick picture here of the other foundations. Here we are. This is this is currently the foundations of the house underneath a barn, so that it's preserved. And being paranormal investigators, I took my friends there, Frank, my buddy Frank, and a couple other friends. Just actually before we came out to visit you,
Mm-hmm.
and we were inside, and we took out recorders, and we're trying some EVP work, and because that to me would have been the greatest thing in the world to get something there. But we got nothing.
Yep.
So we're getting ready to leave, and I mean, I'm telling them the Fox family story, and this is like going to Bethlehem. You have to understand that how the importance of the ground that you're on, what's going on. So I said, we're getting ready to go, and I said, girls, can you give us a rap? Can you give us a couple raps? And all of a sudden, it was the loudest metallic rap I ever heard. We all jumped. It was so loud. I mean, it wasn't like something like just like a squirrel jumping on the roof. It was loud. And I go, did somebody get that? Nobody had the recorders on.
Of course.
But
Never.
it was amazing. And I go and I tell Tracy, Tracy, this is what happened. She goes, the ladies never disappoint. And no, they don't. No, they don't. It was an amazing thing. Now, before I cut you loose, we have to talk about historic Palmyra. Tell us about the museum. Tell us about what's going on. You've got some great programs. I'm looking at this. I saw the speakeasy program that you guys are going to run. I thought if I was a little bit closer, I'd have to come and visit. But
oh my gosh.
Tell everybody about the museum. Tell them about how you guys can get a hold of you guys and the events that are going on. And I can't wait actually till when we get together. But you can talk about that.
So, oh gosh, if you have not visited our museums, you're really missing out. And I can even do 2-part tours where I meet you at the Fox Sisters property and then bring you into Palmyra. I love these museums for multiple reasons. But we have 5 individual museums. We have a coverlet museum. We have the largest collection of woven coverlets. They're like blankets. They have multi-purposes, and we have the largest collection in the United States. They are displayed year round. We have a vault that keeps the other ones that we don't display. Typically, it's about 65 to 70 that we'll display every year. And that's just on one street. And then you go the next block over on Market Street in Palmyra, and we have our historical museum. That is an old hotel. It's from 1826, and it's called the St. James Hotel. And we have 23 rooms, and each of the rooms are different themed, and it's just amazing. It's pretty much Palmyra and vicinity for the history in that museum. And then right next to that one, we have our Erie Canal Depot. This year, we are celebrating 200 years of the Erie Canal. Basically, everybody in New York State is. And our Erie Canal Depot is really unique because it has stalls in the basement. And the stalls used to hold the mules and the horses that would pull the packet boats on the Erie Canal. And we have those. They're accessible. They're really neat to look at. We have some really cool like models and dioramas in there too. Next to our depot, we have our little print shop. Our printer was not related to anybody that did the Book of Mormon. Our printer was John M. Jones. And we show you the progression of printing in our print shop. So we have printing presses. We have a giant paper cutter that will take an arm off. It's pretty impressive. I just started using it a couple of years ago because I was terrified. Murphy's Law. If anybody was going to lose a finger, it was going to be me. But so far, I've got all 10. I'm doing good. And then, of course, the gem of all gems, we have our William Phelps General Store and Family Residence. And Tim mentioned earlier that Sybil Phelps was a spiritualist. She was the granddaughter of William. She lived in the building from 1895 until 1976. And she was amazing. She was a huge supporter of the property, the Fox property. She helped get one of the cornerstones because she worked at a monument company. So she helped out with that. But the really cool thing about her family legacy is that her father in 1940, he was working in the general store. And they opened this general store in 1868. And so he worked in there until 1940. And just one day in July, he decided he didn't want to work anymore. And he locked the door and they never went back in the store. So we have all the original products on the shelves the way he left them. It's an incredible place. The energy is amazing. We even have eggs from 1940 for 45 cents. Just saying, throwing it out there. But we do a lot of events. We own and operate all of our 5 museums, so we don't get any government funding, which I used to think was horrible, and now I'm kind of happy that we don't. But we rely on our admissions from people, and we do ghost investigations, so we rely on those. We do a lot of fundraising, and we have great events. And some of those events are like what's coming up in July, our speakeasy. If you want to know what it's like to be in a 1920s speakeasy, let us know. We've got tickets. I'm dressing up. My character's name is Celeste Moonbeam. So if that gives you any indication of who I am. And it's going to be a fun murder mystery night. We do lots of walks. We have an Underground Railroad walk coming up in May. We're also doing a pre-Mother's Day brunch in the Phelps parlors. So that's kind of a cool thing to do in the museums, and lots of walks and talks and programs, and of course Erie Canal stuff. So just, you can go to our website and check it out, or you can email me, historicpalmyra@gmail. I'm easy to get a hold of. So sort of.
Sort of. And my favorite event. I am so honored. I swear to God, I'm so honored when you asked me to come out and help you guys with a fundraiser for Sybil Phelps' birthday. Is this year the 130th? Is this her 130th?
She will be 130 this year.
Wow, that's amazing to me.
It's so amazing.
They have what I love about it is you go in and you get a ticket, and they have a little I call it munchkin buffets. They have soups and everything. That's great.
It's a birthday party.
It's a birthday party. It is. And then you have psychic readers.
Yep.
And if anybody has never been in this house, the apartments, it is mind-blowing. It's just mind-blowing. It's just amazing. The energy and everything, what goes on in there, and just it's amazing. But it was so great because you asked me to do gallery, and I'm thinking, absolutely, hands down, it's one of my favorite charities. It's one of my favorite preservation works, and I love coming out there. And
people love having you.
They love
your flowers. They love your candy bars.
Hey, so you know what? Rule of thumb. If I suck in gallery, you'll love me because I'm feeding you candy. Chocolate, everybody loves chocolate. That's the way it works. There's a method to my madness, Tracy. Method. You got to know this stuff.
Right.
But
I'm learning.
But my absolute favorite memory. I take Frank for a ride. I take my buddy Frank, my 6'3" CO weightlifting trainer. I take him for a little ride. Come on, Frank. I'm going to take you someplace. We stop out. We end up. I took him up to around and stuff, and we stopped at the museum. We're in the main the where the hotel was, and
Yep.
again, there was a fire and people died in there, so that's got a lot of haunting to it. But Tracy's going to take us around. She's going to show us around, and we're walking, and all of a sudden, a light turns on. She reaches up, pulls the cord, keeps going, like nothing happened. No, that light didn't go on. No, that didn't happen. No. Frank doesn't miss a thing. Hey, did that light just go on? Tracy goes, oh, yeah. I go, see? It's the way it is. Here's Frank. Oh, he's listening in. Yep. I love it. At that point, Frank fell in love with Palmyra, and and I promise you, we'll be back. We're going to come back this year. We'll be as a little group, and we'll come out and hang out.
Yes.
Because I love the place. Tracy, I want to thank you so much for coming on. And the Fox family, the Fox sisters, has always been something that has always been a subject that has been near and dear to me, because again, I won't say growing up in Lilydale, but going there in the 70s, 72, 73, when I was younger, that was something that we always learned about. And the more that I got entrenched in the legends behind it, the more I started looking for the real people behind those legends, And I just found it just so fascinating that they were human beings. And I think that's something that, they always say, never meet your legends, never meet the people that you want to. But I say do it, because I think it's more important to find out who they were than what people say about them.
Yep, absolutely.
And the other thing is, everybody, I'm telling you right now, if you're in New York State, make a pilgrimage. You got to make a pilgrimage to two places. The foundations, and that we could talk about the cottage and the foundations and the Flo Cottrell and when they moved it and the burnings of the houses and everything. We could talk about that for a night, but go see this, because it's magical. When you go on that property, it's magical.
It is.
Number 2, Palmyra, it's magical. And see the amazing, magical Tracy, because she is. She's one of my favorite people. You're one of my favorite people. Stay on board.
Ditto.
Stay on board, and I'll thank you properly off the air.
You got it.
Thank you so much for spending a wonderful time.
Anytime.
It was just a great interview. I just love talking to you about these things. Oh my God. And just a side note, do you know who the very first person was when I found the death mask of the Mormon prophet Joseph Smith? Do you know who the very first? I took a picture. I was not even home. I was still there. I took a picture and sent it to Tracy, because I only knew there's only one other person in the world that would understand and understand what this was, and I loved it. So, hey, Tracy, I'll be right back.
All right.
Thank you so much, guys. I love being able to go, and I love being able to share with everybody people that I just adore and stories that I just adore. And it's so important for all of us to go and understand this, and especially being a New York State guy, to understand the importance of what happened. And there's so many different religions. You have the Millerites that turned into the Seventh-day Adventists, and you have the traditions and philosophies of the Oneida community, and all this stuff. It's amazing. And it's so important to understand this stuff. And it all ties in together with the paranormal movement. So guys, take the time to understand the history behind what you do. Okay? Paranormal investigation didn't start with Jason Hawes and Ghost Hunters. I love Jason, but it didn't start with him. It started so many years before. And to me, the history is fascinating. So guys, be kind to each other. Talk to you guys soon. Where else? Where the elite meet next to the dumpster transfer station, here at the Black Cat Lounge. Ciao, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.